Warning: there will be mention of assault and violence against women. The hijab. It comes in many variations and styles, but in its most common form, it is the head covering that Muslim women are obliged to wear around most men. It includes the obligation to cover almost the entire body. The necessity of the hijab is debated among some groups of Muslims, but the sweeping majority agrees that it is at least highly encouraged, while the smaller majority agrees that it is mandatory for any female past the age of menstruation. The hijab is a highly controversial topic, especially given the recently publicized and ongoing incidents of violence in Iran. Women are being punished for not wearing the hijab, which happens more often than you'd think. So I'm glad that this topic is finally being discussed publicly. I could tell you about how the hijab started in Islam as a way to differentiate slave women from free women, or I could tell you about how Prophet Muhammad's companion Umar ibn al-Khattab harassed Muhammad's wives and by extension bullied him into covering up his wives and his followers to this day. But that's not what I'll do. In this series of videos, I'd like to approach the hijab from a different angle in hopes of getting you to consider points of view you may have not noticed. Some of the examples and stories I will share come from conversations I've had with women who wear the hijab. Please listen to them and do not invalidate them. My name is Apostate Aladdin. Let's get right into it.
Everybody says a choice, but it wasn't a choice for me. Neither was it for my sisters or for any of the friends that I know. I mean, I used to say it was a choice too before I became an ex-Muslim. That's the funny thing about it.
In recent years, there's been a narrative propagating the broadly defined Western world. The narrative that the hijab is categorically a choice, and that those who force the hijab on their female relatives are behaving un-Islamically. I think that the countless examples of that happening should demonstrate that it's a big problem, and that it should be addressed rather than scapegoated, but I digress. As the narrative goes, not only is the hijab a choice, but it is a great choice that comes with benefits for the woman. Tangible benefits that we can see and measure today in this life. For example, there is the idea that the hijab empowers women by reducing their likelihood to be objectified, or that the hijab is a symbol of modesty and virtue. These ideas are often repeated by well-meaning non-Muslims who I wish would save their enthusiasm till after learning about this complex issue. By the way, I will address you as if you were a woman. Perhaps that'll help you think about it from her point of view. Say you feel objectified and you wish that men treated you as a human being and didn't reduce you to just your looks. You might think that covering up your hair and body will force them to look at you less and listen to you more, and perhaps that works in some situations as a temporary half measure. But where that's the norm, nothing changes. Women in Muslim countries and communities are objectified even more than Western women. They're harassed and assaulted at higher rates with little justice to be found. And because of the stopgap of covering up women to avoid the men's behavior, the burden now falls on the women every time. Victim blaming is rampant in Muslim communities. If a woman is assaulted, the very first thing people do is question her clothing, or her morals, or her presence in that location. Why wasn't she wearing a hijab? Was she a loose woman who was asking for it, getting herself in a bad situation? Why was she walking in that street at that time? And provided that she wore the hijab and did everything else by the book, so to speak, she's still scrutinized by many. In fact, some women are punished and disciplined for being sexually assaulted by a man.
My sister, right, a young teenager, and she was just in the park, and my mother was there, and one of her older cousin was there, and apparently somebody molested her. My cousin found out, he told my mother. Rather than my sister being consoled and then she being treated like a victim, my mom took her to the storeroom and beat the living shit out of her. And the fact that, I have to stay silent and respect them when they get to do all of that.
That's because this precedent has been set, that men have hard to control urges and that women must cover. For decency, for piety, for avoiding hell, or for heavenly reward. And because, in their minds, this is the last line of defense against men. You can't control men and their God-given testosterone, so why don't you find a solution that doesn't involve the men at all? That is why when a Muslim woman is harassed, people around her often scramble to find a cause that isn't simply because a man did it. Because in their minds, that answer is a dead end. There must be something else the next woman could do better to avoid being the next victim. This victim-blaming mentality stems from the Prophet himself, the source of this religion. He said, "A woman should be concealed, for when she leaves the house, the devil uses her as a pawn to tempt men," insinuating that her leaving the house is putting everyone in harm's way. How is that empowering? In one instance, the Prophet saw a woman, got aroused, had sex with his wife, then went to brag about it to his buddies and said, "The woman advances and retires in the shape of a devil, so when one of you sees a woman, he should come to his wife, for that will repel what he feels in his heart." Talk about demonizing women, literally. Advances in the shape of a devil, what the hell does that even mean? Scholars explain that God created men with natural lust for women, and that women invite stronger temptation than that of the devil himself. How is that empowering? So would a hijab prevent you from being objectified and sexualized? Or would it just put emphasis on your supposedly God-given hair and body, and make them an inevitable burden that you have to deal with for the rest of your life? If you concede that you need to hide your hair in order to not be sexualized, you're allowing them to shift the goalposts. If men find your smile or your face appealing, I suppose you might as well cover those too. You don't want to do the devil's bidding now, do you? Rather than allowing the men to shift the goalposts, consider standing your ground and asserting that you're dignified despite what they think. Otherwise, rather than seeing two humans with clothes on, this photo becomes that of a man and a half-naked woman, just for showing roughly the same amount of skin and hair. The hijab does not give you back your body autonomy, but rather it robs you of it. So is it really a choice if it's sold to you as a necessary measure in order to be treated fairly by men? Or even worse, a necessary measure to prevent moral corruption in society at large? It seems like the hijab is the acceptance of your responsibility to not be an unwitting helper of the devil. It seems very unlikely that a genderless creator intended to deprive you of simple pleasures like feeling the breeze in your hair, just because he's catering to men's so-called natural impulses. Impulses that he created, mind you. It seems most likely that men are convincing you of your need for the hijab, so you'd feel vulnerable without it and empowered with it. Before I wrap up, I'd like to state a few things explicitly. It is not up to me to tell you how you feel about your hijab, but it's also not up to you to tell other women how they feel about their hijab, or lack thereof. I am merely echoing the words of many ex-Muslim and Muslim women whose voices are ignored in favor of pro-hijab campaigns. Videos like these are often dismissed and framed as hate inciting to avoid engaging with criticism. Nothing I said implies or justifies harming a hijabi woman. That doesn't help the woman, it doesn't help other women, it doesn't serve any nefarious agenda that I'd be accused of having. I openly assert that the hijab is a net negative and a harmful concept, but that does not mean that I hate those who wear it. Just like I openly criticize Islam, and it doesn't mean that I hate Muslims. I think actions speak louder than words, and I have dozens of hours of conversations to prove it. I urge you to engage with my ideas rather than dismissing them as hateful. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you liked this video, and in the next video I'll talk about how the hijab makes its way into a woman's life. Till then, I hope that you think twice before repeating the mantra, hijab is empowerment, and I hope that you think critically and think for yourself.
I don't really know what the future of the ex-Muslim community really holds, but I do hope that it's more conversations like this, because I know a lot of young Muslim women or non-Muslim women who might stumble across your page and it'll be the first time they're ever hearing anything like this, and in a way that's kind of coming from inside the community. I say that with quotations,